Welcome to episode 11 of On Air with Phoenician Hunter and Tesla 369, titled Mysteries of the Cabiri, the Great Gods of Samothrace, which is off the back of a number of articles written by Phoenician Hunter. Good morning, Phoenician Hunter.
Good morning. Buongiorno. Good to be back.
Great to have you. Now, we'll just get straight into it because this is, again, off the back of some previous podcasts that we've recorded, specifically around Freemasonry. And I want to get right into it and talk about the Cabiri, who they are, where they came from, how old are they, how far back does it go. So, once again, welcome, Phoenician Hunter, and over to you.
Yeah, okay. We'll go through that during this discussion. I wasn't aware of this group either until I started researching the origins of Freemasonry. And this word, this name or group kept coming up, referred to as the Mysteries of the Cabiri. And the people who were mentioning this group were predominantly Freemasons, okay? So they were quoting this name. And from reading what they were saying, it didn't seem to me that they fully understood 100% what and who the Cabiri were, but just knew of their existence, basically. So what it is, all right, the Cabiri is the name given to a collection of gods or deities that were worshipped on the small Greek island of Samothrace, right? Small little Greek island. For those who don't know, my co-host has Greek heritage, so that's why I mentioned it.
Yes, I am familiar with it actually. In Greek, the Greek translation is Samothraki. Whilst I haven't been there, I am familiar with the place. Yeah, but it's the first time I'm getting the connection between what you're talking about and the origins of the Cabiri.
Yeah. So the collection of the gods or deities that I mentioned, they are known collectively as the mysteries of the Cabiri. So that's what that refers to. And some researchers have claimed that they are 7 in number, and they are referring to the planets, the 7 planets. Okay, but that's one idea. So the cult on the island endured for over 1,000 years. So it goes way back. Okay, before Christianity, before Judaism. It's almost like the dawn of religion. And it sort of ended when the Roman Empire started introducing Christianity throughout the empire. So around 300 AD, thereabouts, is right. That's when the island and these mysteries sort of become forgotten. And I think there's a reason for that. The reason I found, and we'll get into later in more detail, is because it was a threat to the new doctrine that they wanted to implement, right? Which was Christianity. So it was a threat to that. The origins, experts say the origins are unknown, right? But again, like there are clues. There are clues there that, we can sort of piece it together a bit. So they say that the island was first inhabited by people from Asia Minor or Anatolia, right? Was the old name for that area, which is sort of around where modern day Turkey. And some people say that it was inhabited by Trojans. Is something I found, which I disclose in the article in more detail. The Trojans I wrote about in another post called The Noble Ones. And I know I've mentioned this before, but it's worth repeating that all my posts and articles are part of a greater story. So they work, you can read them individually, but if you want to get the bigger picture, you need to read all of them because I'm telling the one story or unraveling the one story. They're all connected. I also had this idea probably in a year or two when I've got enough articles that I might combine them into a book. But I just wanted to also mention that in the modern era, the island became famous for the discovery of an ancient Greek artifact. And this was in the 1800s. In 1863, a winged statue of the goddess Nike. Is that how you say it? Or is it Nike?
It's in Greek. It's Nike. So the
Nike.
anglicized version should be Nike.
That's what I thought.
A lot of Americans call it Nike, which is incorrect, but it's Nike in Greek, yeah, which means victory.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that was uncovered on the island, and like you mentioned, the Romans called her Victory.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And she was very important to the Romans, especially the Roman Senate. So the political class of ancient Rome. And I've also done another post covering that. Again, like I said, it's They're all interconnected. And that post was called Rome's Victory. So I found it interesting. I just brought that up because I found it interesting that they found that statue on that island because it was very important to the Romans. And then with, the ascension of Christianity, the island and the mysteries are sort of, hidden and forgotten.
Sure.
Now, that's all done on purpose. Again, I mentioned this in the article that during the 18th and 19th centuries, scholars were concerned with discovering the origin of religion in general. And what they found by looking at the mysteries of the Cabiri, that they found a similarity between their rituals or their religion and the doctrine of the Trinity, which is, as you know, very, very important to the Christian faith. Okay. So in Christianity, it refers to the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
3 persons sharing one essence, I guess. So they found a link to the mysteries of the Cabiri. So again, they're finding links to Christianity. Again, this predates Christianity by up to 1,000 years.
Can I ask, what was the link? You say Christianity refers to as the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Are you aware of what the link was?
Yeah, no, the link is that that doctrine of the Trinity existed before Christianity.
Before that, okay.
So what they're saying is that it wasn't original. It wasn't original with Christianity. That's not when it was
discovered or
discovered. Or implemented.
It's interesting you should say that because there was a quote that, and the reason why it stood out for me was a quote by Voltaire, which I'll read out in a moment. But the reason why it stood out for me was because I have visited Voltaire's residence or palace, let's call it. It's close to the border of France and Switzerland. And I had, the reason I went there was I had this connection with Voltaire and his writings, etc., which is why this quote stood out. And if you perhaps allow me to read this quote, because I think it's relevant to what you're talking about. He stated that, who were these hierophants, these sacred Freemasons who celebrated their ancient mysteries of Samothrace, and whence came they and their gods Cabiri? So it's interesting that someone like Voltaire would have mentioned that. So look, I'd like to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I wasn't aware that he was a Freemason. So that was a surprise to me. So what he's saying there is that he's revealing the connection with these mysteries to Freemasonry. But he's revealing also that whence came they and their gods, Cabiri. So he's sort of saying he doesn't really know what the origins of these are, but he's making the connection to, the Freemasons that celebrate these mysteries. And we need to remember that Voltaire was around, in the 1700s. So this goes way back,
of course,
to the dawn of modern Freemasonry. And there's already this connection there. And this is, I think, the first that I've come across in any writings where it's mentioned the Cabiri and Freemasonry in the same sentence.
And there are a number of other connections that you have actually highlighted in your article. Did you want to talk about the Phoenician connection, for example?
Well, see, that's interesting because then the mysteries of the Cabiri, like many other things, are also connected to the Phoenicians. The Phoenicians come up again. And in our last podcast, we discussed the connection with Freemasonry and the Phoenicians and how their rituals were basically taken from Phoenician religion.
Yes.
So here again, I found that the historian William Betham that we mentioned previously.
Yes.
He confirms this connection also.
And he confirms it really through yet another quote. And again, I think this is going to give some reference to people. His connection was, or his quote, in fact, was, it appears that the Cabiric mysteries continued among the Celto-Phoenician colonies and now exist under the name of Freemasonry, the shadow of the former substance.
Wow, yeah. So
again, please elaborate.
So in this quote, Betham claims that these mysteries were originally practiced by the Phoenicians. And then it was the Phoenicians that spread these mysteries among their colonies. And the reason he calls them the Celto-Phoenicians is Celto were the European indigenous people. And the Phoenicians went there and mingled with them. And that's why he calls them the Celto-Phoenician colonies of the West.
Right.
So he's not referring to the colonies in the East. He's talking about, the European colonies. So it was them that spread it and also into the British Isles. And that's how it makes its way into England.
Well, it makes perfect sense, doesn't it? Because, in previous podcasts, if our audience listen to, you make the connection from Freemasonry to Phoenicia.
Exactly.
And now the connection from Phoenicians to the Cabiri, so the Cabiri to Freemasonry. So it's all, for me,
Yep.
the penny's starting to drop now about
Exactly.
the timeline.
Yeah, exactly. They're all connected. And he's also saying that it exists in modern Freemasonry, but only as a shadow of its former substance, is what he says. So it's sort of a dumbed down version, or perhaps some of it has been lost.
Mm.
So Freemasonry is sort of, I don't know, trying to piece it together, or just kept some part of it, but not in its former glory, basically.
Well, a lot of our listeners will also know of Albert Pike because we've mentioned him quite a number of times. And there is a quote that you've also mentioned in there, which he says, for the worship of the Cabiri probably came from Phoenicia into Samothrace. So again, the fact that he says it based on what you've researched, the pieces of the puzzle are starting to now fit together.
Yeah, Albert Pike there is just confirming what other researchers were claiming, that it actually did come from Phoenicia into the Samothrace island.
Yes.
So, yeah, it's just more confirmation. And then another Freemason, again, Manly P. Hall,
Who you've mentioned
provides,
before.
yeah, again, you want to get the information from the horse's mouth, right?
Of course,
You want to know to people, you want to go to the people who know this stuff,
Mm.
not to people who are commenting from the outside about this certain group.
You're making absolute perfect sense to me. Again, we've done a number of podcasts. This is number 11. For me, the last half a dozen have now started to connect the dots. So again, I encourage people, if they want to be at the stage that I'm at about the understanding of what you're talking about, then they should go back and listen to the previous podcasts or even read your articles, which I highly recommend.
Like I mentioned earlier, it is one big story. So they're not all like individual pieces where they can stand alone, but again, you're not going to get the full picture that way. So I like to go and see what Freemasons have to say about Freemasonry, not opponents have to say about it. Do you know what I mean? I mean, criticism is fine, but you're going to get people who are going to say, oh, that's evil, or that's this way or that way, without fully understanding what they're talking about.
Sure.
They're just going to criticize it from their own personal point of view or their own belief. So Manly P. Hall, yeah, he provides some interesting details concerning the Cabiri, and perhaps, again, why they have been kept hidden. So what he found was in the rituals of the Cabiri, there existed a form of pine tree worship. This tree, he says, was trimmed into the form of a cross and then cut down in honor of the murdered god, or the dying god myth. So here he's revealing the early form of the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. Now, remember, this was, hundreds to 1,000 years before Christianity. Okay, is revealing a ritual that is similar to the crucifixion of Jesus.
Sure.
So if this was more publicly known and these mysteries were known to the general public, maybe Christians might question their faith. That's why I believe it's been kept hidden.
Can I just ask, and I'm not sure if it's relevant here, but wasn't the act of crucifixion common practice around the time of Jesus Christ?
No, that's a lie.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a myth that it wasn't practiced by the Romans, as they say. I mean, that again is, Christian writers, theologians writing that crap.
Wow, okay.
The same with murdering Christians, throwing them to the lions, all that didn't happen. No,
Wow,
no.
okay.
Yeah, they had to make these Christians as martyrs and heroes and courage and because their faith was so strong and all this. No, that didn't happen. But that's another discussion.
Of course.
I haven't written about that, but Edward Johnson has.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. So we spoke last week in depth about Hiram Abiff and the ritual there that was practiced by the Freemasons. And again, we find that ritual was also practiced in the Cabiric mysteries. So again, that was revealed by Manly P. Hall, who found the origins of that ritual, and he points to these mysteries. So to recap on the Hiram Abiff and its connection to the building of Solomon's temple, we showed that it was an allegory for the journey of the sun through the 12 signs of the zodiac, just to remind our listeners.
Yes.
Right. So again, another ritual, another Freemasonic ritual that has its origins with this Cabiric mysteries.
And here is probably a good segue into, William Betham and the extensive research that he's done from what you've written in your articles. He made an interesting observation that I thought was quite relevant to this discussion regarding the Cabiric mysteries. And I will read it out because, again, I think it gives it a reference point to what you're talking about. He writes, "Here we have an account of the manufacture of these allegoric mysteries and the cause which induced their construction, namely to serve the profitable ends of the priests and the possessors of the secret mysteries. Thus commenced the Cabiric mysteries of Samothrace, so celebrated among the ancients, and still continued to our days under the name of Freemasonry."
That's a big one. And
That's huge.
I mean, that quote there and his research pretty much says that he concluded that Phoenician priests purposely developed, right, a system of allegorical mythology, which are alive in, the Abrahamic faiths today. So Judaism, Islam, and Christianity. So according to him, they developed this and spread it among the various nations of the world, because don't forget that the Phoenicians were the traders. They were the seafarers who traveled extensively. They were ones that, moved around throughout Europe and the East. It almost was the link between the East and the West.
Sure.
So if anyone could do it, they could. So they spread this mythology around the world. And the purpose was to deceive and profit from mankind, right? While keeping the discoveries of learning like science,
yes,
and astronomy and all that, and keeping that hidden to themselves because that gives them power.
Of course.
And these are what make up the mysteries of the Cabiri. So the mysteries are science at the end of the day, astronomy, astrology.
Yes.
And that again leads on to my posts, The Power of God,
Yes.
and Time is Money, and I explain why they kept this power, and it was to profit, to make money, and to manipulate the minds of mankind. We're going off topic now because
no, that's okay, but it's still interesting. I find it fascinating how all this is connecting to astrology and astronomy. And again, like you said, your post, The Power of God, is amazing. And I encourage people to read that.
So, yeah, I mean, the way I conduct my research is I start from the present and work back. Okay, so I looked at the world and say, all right, what is this construct? We live in this system. And it's for me, and I've probably mentioned this before, it's a commercial construct, right? So if you've got a commercial construct, who would manage that? Merchants would. And then I found that the merchants were connected to the priest class. And then you got to go back. Okay, so who are the priest class? What were they doing? And then you go back and back. And that it leads back to this moment here where they, implemented these myths to hide the science that was so valuable to them as their tool to manipulate. Back to William Betham, he's also the first that I have come across that makes this connection between the mysteries of the Cabiri with the trade and guild companies that we speak so often about on here.
Of course, there's the connection. I love it.
Yeah, it's the first one I've ever come across. And he says the guilds and companies of the arts and mysteries of trade, right? So the trade and merchant craft companies.
Yes.
So in all branches, so in all of them, arose in the later days from these Cabiri.
Wow.
There you go. There's the guilds and livery companies of London that are so famous, and all the other ones across Europe. He says that they grew out of the Cabiri. Wow. So that also implies that's why there's a strong connection between those guild and livery companies with Freemasonry, which we've mentioned in other podcasts and articles. So this all makes sense again. This sort of ties it all in.
Of course.
So that's where the connection is. This is the origins of all those Freemasonry, the guilds. They all connect to the mysteries of the Cabiri, but so does Christianity. It's almost like they've taken what they needed from there and gone off in their own branches. So
and this is perhaps a little bit off topic, and I'm not sure whether you'd be in a position to answer it, but you say Christianity, you say Phoenicians, you say the Cabiri, you say the City of London. How would Freemasonry and Christianity have a connection?
Well, a lot of what the Freemasons believe in a lot of their rituals, their patron saints, Saint John the Baptist, and how Christians venerate him as well, and so do the Freemasons. So there's a connection. There are a lot of connections there, similar connections between Freemasonry and Christianity. And this brings me up to another point that I neglected to mention in the last podcast. And a lot of people view Freemasonry today as evil and satanic. Okay. Now, there was a time not that long ago where Freemasonry was seen as a noble institution, and members were seen as almost heroes and good citizens and honorable people.
Yes.
And as the founders of America were mostly Freemasons.
That's right.
And if you look at the history of America, there were times when they had parades with members with their gear marching down the street. I mean, you can look it up. There are photos, and the Freemasons established a lot of hospitals, charities, doing good deeds.
Yes.
In later years, maybe because of their involvement with a lot of revolutions around the world, or maybe because of certain authors writing about them in a negative light, it has turned completely in the last century, where now they're seen as completely evil. But I just wanted to mention and remind people that it wasn't always the case. There was a specific case in America where he was a member of the Freemasons, and he wanted to leave, or I think he was murdered, and this is what led to a sort of a backlash against Freemasonry in America.
So who would have initiated? So you're saying that that this negativity towards the Freemasonry was initiated out of that incident? Or has it been?
That was one of the catalysts. Yeah, that was one of the catalysts for it. And then it led to a party called the Anti-Freemasonic Party in America.
Right.
So just like you've got the Democrats and the Republicans, you had a party called the Anti-Freemasonry Party. Okay. And that was led by predominantly Christian minister or Christian members. I would say that most of this had come from Christians, right?
Right. Not necessarily the Catholic Church.
No. What I'm talking about here was predominantly in America.
Okay.
And some of it by their own actions. I'm not going to say that they've been completely innocent. Some of it by their own actions, where they seem to be involved with a lot of stuff. And you see that today with people make connections with them and mass media, with music and television, and
sure.
They seem to be behind. Like I said, they were behind a lot of revolutions, for good or ill. Why are they doing this? So if people don't understand the reason, they're going to automatically think it's sinister. And their actions have led to conflict and wars, and there's a case to be made that it's not all good.
Yeah, of course. You hear of stories, and whether they're true or not, that people, when I say evil people like P. Diddy and Jay-Z, they're all those two in particular are considered to be part of Freemasonry. Now, that's not necessarily a good thing.
Well, yeah, exactly. And then they, there are researchers that point to them doing certain signs and
that's right.
Symbols.
Right.
Now, I want to say from my personal experience, years going back now, I've been on photo shoots, and directed photo shoots for advertising.
Sure.
When I was in the advertising industry. And I can tell you that a lot of these models and celebrities that are asked to do certain poses for a photo shoot don't know what the hell they're doing. Okay.
Right. So
they don't really know the meaning and significance behind what they're doing. They're paid for the day. They go there, they're told to do this, and they do it.
So covering one eye, for example.
Exactly.
Or holding their hands in a triangular format. That's it's all part of, I guess, the photo shoot.
Yeah. I mean, people should be more aware of this. If Lady Gaga, for instance, if they release a photo where she's got her hand over covering one eye, it's not necessarily her saying to the photographer, hey, this is what I want to do, and take the shot.
Of course.
Okay, people got to be aware of that. A lot of these people don't have a clue what they're doing, and the fraternities they're joining, and what the significance of that actually is.
They're being used. Okay, so they're being used to send a message to the broader public. Now, even though the person, the Lady Gaga, the Jay-Z, whoever it might be, don't know what they're actually doing, it is the people behind the scenes that are trying to send some sort of message of symbolism, for example.
Yeah, exactly. But the general public don't know what these symbols, what they mean. Yeah, it's like you said, it's like probably two groups trying to speak to each other in
Right.
symbols,
Yes.
because
Okay.
the language for the people is the written word.
Correct. Yeah.
But for the elites or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
the secret fraternities and societies, it's not. It's symbols,
But for what
signs and
purpose?
symbols.
And I know we're completely getting off topic here, but it's for what purpose would they be doing it?
Let's put it this way. If you wanted to speak to someone and didn't want the other people around you understanding what you were saying, you would speak in a language that the others wouldn't understand,
Sure.
right?
Sure.
So I think it's partly that,
Mm.
and partly because signs and symbols have a certain effect on us that is not, it's sort of beneath the surface. They affect us in ways that we are not aware of.
Let's circle back and continue along the conversation. So, following on
Yeah.
from what you've just said regarding, what William Betham said around the guilds and
Yeah.
livery companies of London, where to from here?
Okay, so it also refers to all the guild and trade companies, not just the later ones in London. So
Right.
I think Betham is referring to, like he says, in all branches arose in the later days from these Cabiri. There were the trading guild companies in Florence that were very powerful at one time. So, and Germany as well, with the Hanseatic League merchants as well. So
Okay.
he's referring
Okay.
to all these merchant and guild fraternities or livery companies that have their origins in the Cabiri. So they're keeping something, and what they're keeping is, like I said, like he said earlier, a sacred science, and that sacred science is predominantly or partly astronomy, astrology, and the sciences of nature and the sciences of manipulation, probably also. So they use that to their advantage, and they gave us the allegorical mythologies that people believe in to this day.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Which sort of have become our religions,
Of course.
our popular religions.
So, would you like to recap on everything that we've discussed today, from the early origins of the Cabiri through to the Phoenician connection and the likes of Albert Pike and Manly P. Hall and William Betham, etc.? Would you like to just run a recap for our listeners?
Yeah, and we should just mention that this is sort of part two, almost in a sense, to our previous discussion,
That's right.
the Master Masons, where we made the connection between modern Freemasonry and the Phoenician Canaanite religion and mysteries there.
Yes.
So this sort of just went a bit further back and said, okay, yes, the Phoenicians brought this knowledge into the West, but where did it originate? And then it sort of shows that it was something called the Cabiric mysteries, which were a collection of gods, some say 7 in total, that probably represented the planets. Right. And these were brought into Greece through Asia Minor or Anatolia by Phoenicians. Okay. So there was the Phoenician connection again that brought these in. But the true nature of these mysteries were kept secret, and they were mostly hidden with the introduction of Christianity throughout the empire.
Right.
And the reason we can allude to is because a lot of these mysteries were later adopted by the later religions of Christianity. So it was prudent to keep these hidden. Otherwise, it would not render, Christianity authentic. It would show that it was a set of ideas that had existed before Christ. So that was my summary of the Cabiric mysteries. And again, I there's a lot more in the article that, we haven't covered here.
And I'm glad you've raised that, because as always, we refer our listeners, and to any new listeners, to access your Substack at phoenicianhunter.substack.com. Because, again, not just about what we've discussed today, but it's also going way back even further. You can listen to the podcasts, subscribe to Phoenician Hunter, because, again, there's a lot of information, a lot of good research that's been done. Well, look, that was a great recap, and I hope our listeners have enjoyed this podcast. We look forward to yet another interesting discussion in our next podcast, which we will announce shortly. So, Phoenician Hunter, thank you very much.
Thank you again.
And look forward to our next chat very soon. Stay well.